industries while protecting and enhancing our vast environmental resources. Today's webinar will focus on how the integration of cover crops and livestock grazing can improve soil health and productivity on your farm. Cover crops can serve as the bridge between cropping systems and the ability to integrate livestock, increase crop diversity, extend grazing seasons, reduce stored forage feed needs, and many other benefits. I'd like to invite Robert McGill from Winrock International to give us some technical information on how this webinar will run, including how to submit your questions. Robert?
Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the SFA webinar here. Our software today is fairly straightforward. We have the presentation there on the left, and then on the right we have the control panel. Sometimes that control panel minimizes itself. If you'd like to prevent that from happening, just press that orange arrow button. And to keep that control panel visible at all times, you can click on the View option there on the panel and deselect Auto Hide the Control Panel. This is an interactive webinar, and we definitely encourage the asking of questions, and Kent will be our moderator today. So the way for you to do that is we have this questions tab, and if you just type your question in that small box, Kent will address it and then bring it to our presenter. We will also be sending out a short survey following this webinar. These surveys serve to enhance the experience and overall improvement of the webinars that we put on for you. So please take a few moments and take that survey. I think that's it for me. So I'm going to hand everything over to our presenter, Alan Williams.
Okay, thank you, Robert. I appreciate that. And Kent, thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. As Kent and Robert said, we're going to try to be as interactive as possible with this. So please feel free to type your questions in the chat box there. And as we have breaks between slides and so forth, Kent will bring those to my attention, and we will try to respond to that. So this afternoon, what we want to do is take a look at some past research that's been done looking at the integration of cover crops and livestock into row crop operations, and talk a little bit about some current research and case studies and so forth that are going on, and then talk about the practical applications, including potential issues and complications. So, cover crops integrated into livestock, and Robert, let me make sure that, okay, there we go. All right. Cover crops being integrated and livestock being integrated with row crops is actually not something new. It's something that many today are just being exposed to, but this has been done for a very long time, and actually some of the research that I'm going to present to you today is research that was done maybe 20 years ago or so, clearly illustrating that this particular topic was being looked at, quite a while ago, and if we take a look back into old textbooks and research publications from the late 1800s and early 1900s, we'll find that there's quite a bit out there talking about this type of integration. So first, let's define our problem. This particular slide here shows a satellite view of a very large dust storm in western Kansas and eastern Colorado in January of 2013. Now this dust storm is so massive that it shows up very easily on the satellite view, and then the next slide shows you that same dust storm at ground level. Now keep in mind that this is January. We really shouldn't see this happening at any time in that part of the country but to happen in the dead of winter, tells us that we do have some pretty serious issues in terms of keeping cover on the ground and preventing things like this from occurring. And unfortunately, we can find very similar pictures from 2014 and 2015. So we're seeing an increased incidence, particularly in the western U.S., with these dust storms. Now, another problem that we have, and this is certainly something that we're working on pretty hard within the pasture project, and that is harmful runoff creating a massive dead zone in the Gulf of Mexico every year. And this dead zone ranges anywhere from about 4,000 square miles to over 8,000 square miles annually, and is in large part due to heavy loads of nitrate and phosphorus runoff, and including sediment runoff from farming activities from the upper Midwest on down. So we do have some issues that we realize we have to deal with, and many of you on the webinar today are probably aware of the issue that is going on in the state of Iowa right now, where the city of Des Moines has sued upstream farmers and agricultural interest because of nitrate issues in their water supply. So we need to solve some of the problems that we have currently in agriculture before we have someone else trying to solve them for us. Dr. Richard Teague and his co-workers, Dr. Teague is an agricultural researcher at Texas A&M University, made this statement that the problems of many current tillage-based cropping systems can be avoided by ecologically sensitive management of ruminants in mixed crop and grazing agroecosystems. And in their research, they document numerous benefits to our soil health and our ecosystem. These include increased carbon sequestration, improved soil nutrient cycling, increased soil stability, enhanced watershed function, and enhanced biodiversity and wildlife habitat. Now, Teague and co-workers, as well as other researchers, go on to say that our common tillage practices and application of inorganic fertilizers and biocides have reduced soil surface cover and decimated soil microbial communities that control 90% of our soil ecosystem functions, and that collectively these crop production inputs have contributed to the degradation of physical, chemical, and biological properties of soils. And I will say that through both the pasture project and other projects that we have worked on throughout the Midwest and the upper Midwest, it is rather alarming what we're finding when we're collecting soil samples and looking at the current status of Midwest and upper Midwestern soils in terms of organic matter, soil carbon fractions, cation exchange capacities, and nutrient levels. We are definitely seeing a significant decline in all of those areas compared to data that was collected 10, 20 years ago and longer. Delgado and co-workers have found that declining microbial communities directly result in the reduction of nutrient concentrations and availability in the remaining soil, and West and co-workers found that impact of these losses is exacerbated by excess amounts of nutrients applied for 17 of the world's major crops. So what these researchers have proposed and have conducted research on is the integration of livestock as part of the solution. And again, Delgado and Teague and their co-workers have found that ruminants grazing in rangeland and in cultivated forage agroecosystems are beneficial when they are appropriately managed. And Doremus and his colleagues found that these beneficial effects include increased water infiltration, improved water catchment, greater biodiversity, increased ecosystem stability and resilience, and improved carbon sequestration. Now, I said just a moment ago that in collecting samples throughout the Midwest and the upper Midwest, we have seen some alarming data concerning actual soil organic matter and CECs and so forth. Likewise, we're seeing those same impacts on soil water infiltration rates. We've been in many row crop fields, corn and soybean rotation fields, where we have seen water infiltration rates as measured by a double ring infiltrometer average less than an inch an hour, and many of those are averaging less than a half inch an hour. And unfortunately, this means that much of the rainfall that falls on those farms is going to sheet off or run off and is not going to be actually absorbed into the soil and useful to that crop. So again, these researchers have found that by combining crop rotation with livestock grazing, this can be significantly effective at enhancing soil function and health, and that by managing crop production to maintain permanent ground cover through the use of cover crops, that we can significantly increase soil fertility and fix nitrogen. Grazing livestock tend to accelerate nutrient cycling through the consumption and decomposition of residual above ground biomass. And by using crop rotation systems coupled with forage crops and grazing animals, we have been able to significantly reduce the damaging effects of many current arable land management practices, including things like soil erosion, loss of soil organic carbon, elevated greenhouse gas emissions, and so forth. Now, in a study conducted by Franz Lubers and co-workers in between 2002 and 2005, this particular study was conducted in Georgia, but they compared corn with a rye cover crop rotation and then a wheat crop with a summer pearl millet cover crop rotation with grain-only production and then grain plus cattle grazing the cover crop. And they looked at both a disc till and a no-till. So the DT is disc till and NT is no-till. And again, they conducted this research over the 4-year period 2002 to 2005. If we take a look at their data, and again, keep in mind the time period that this was conducted, and corn and wheat both at that time in the southeastern U.S. were worth about $2.50 a bushel, and the gain of cattle was worth about 75 cents a pound based on what cattle were feeder cattle were bringing at that time. So in the grain-only systems, with the corn and rye grain crop and cover crop rotation, they had net returns over variable cost per acre in the disc till of $6.80 and in the no-till right at $38 per acre. In the wheat and pearl millet rotation, net return over variable costs for the disc till was a little over $6, and they actually had a negative almost $6 return per acre for the no-till drill there. Now, when they combined the grain and cover crops plus the grazing, then we had a very favorable impact. They found that net returns per acre over variable cost in the disc till system for corn and rye increased to $89 per acre, with gains on the cattle of 182 pounds per individual or per acre. And in the no-till, net returns were $118 per acre, with cattle gains averaging 312 pounds per acre. And then similar results in the wheat and pearl millet, with significantly higher net returns per acre over the grain and cover crop system only. So their conclusions were that investing in cattle and cover crops increased net return per acre by more than $100 annually over the 4-year period. They also found that the grazing impact from the cattle improved soil microbial biomass. It had no negative effect on soil compaction. It significantly improved soil water infiltration rates and contributed to significant increases in soil organic matter. Now, another study conducted in Tifton, Georgia by the USDA ARS, looking at a cotton peanuts cotton rotation, which in this part of the country is a typical rotation when you are growing cotton. They looked at, and again, the time period was from 2001 to 2003 when this was conducted. So again, keep in mind, you know, we're almost 15 years removed from when this research was done. So researchers have been looking at this for a while. So they compared both ungrazed or no livestock impact acres to grazed acres. What they did was when each of these crops were harvested, they went in and drilled a winter cover crop, and that consisted predominantly of ryegrass, and clovers, legumes. And then they grazed these crops through the winter and into the spring until ready to work the ground and plant the subsequent crop. Now, I have the crop values listed in 2015 terms because I wanted, and I also calculated the net return per acre down at the very bottom of this table with the cattle gain in 2015 terms as well, values, because I wanted you to see not only what the returns were in the 2001 to 2003 period, but what those returns are averaging today for this same system. So we can see that for the crop value alone, in 2001, it ranged from $680 to $693 per acre. For the peanuts, $777 to $787, and then in 03 again for the cotton, $644 to $724. Now, during the winter grazing period, the cattle gained 1.83, 2.12, and 2.03 through the 3-year cycle. The value of that gain in the 2001 to 2003 period averaged $127, $142, and $100 return per acre. However, the same value of that gain in 2015 was $292, $380, $338, and $220, looking at the same yields and the same variables. A joint study conducted by North Dakota State University and the University of Illinois. This study was published in 1990 and conducted in the 1980s. They looked at the integration of cover crops into a typical corn and soybean rotation and found that the advantages of the cover crops included holding the soil or preventing erosion, improving soil tilth, increasing water infiltration rates, increasing water and nutrient retention and cycling, providing a targeted competitor that can compete with weeds and lessen dependence upon herbicides, creating a disease break in short rotations of crops that share similar pathogens, serving as a nitrogen trap to secure unutilized fertilizer within reach of the next crop, and biologically fixing nitrogen for the subsequent crop through incorporation of legumes. Now, they found that by integrating livestock into this row crop cover crop system, they were able to build soil organic matter, reduce soil erosion, reduce fertilizer needs, managed cover crop water usage, and they had weed suppression and management benefits as well. A Canadian study conducted in Saskatchewan looking at the integration of cover crops and cattle into small grains had these results. Again, this was a multi-year study like the others prior, and they found that the integration of cover crops and cattle suppressed the soil weed seed bank and the soil reservoir of pests and pathogens. It increased beneficial soil microbes and nutrient availability. And out of 253 participating farmers, so this is a rather large and extensive field trial study, 80% reported reduction in weed pressure following grazing, and 68% reported higher grain yields following the grazing. And then in another study conducted by the University of Illinois at the Dudley Smith Farm Research Station, this particular station in 2002 was donated to the University of Illinois, and it was converted from a traditional corn soybean rotation farm into an integrated crop and livestock research farm. And this particular research station for the University of Illinois is located near Pana, Illinois, and the soil series there is the Verdon series, which is a silty clay loam. The particular trial that I'm going to talk about this afternoon was conducted from 2004 to 2007. They used a randomized complete block design with 3 replicates. The 4 treatments were continuous corn, winter cover crop, winter cover crop grazing, the continuous corn without grazing, continuous corn with winter cover crop and grazing, continuous corn with corn residue winter grazing, and then perennial pasture that was put into crops and grazed. Okay, so this is just an example of how some of the soil sample data was collected to be able to establish baselines for not only soil fertility and chemistry, but also soil microbial biomass and soil moisture. Now, what you see side by side here are perennial pastures within the Dudley Smith Farm system, and then pastures that have been put back into corn growing right next door. Now, in this particular study, over that 4-year period, they found that the soil microbial biomass carbon was higher for the winter cover crop livestock integration compared to the other systems. This was particularly so going from 0 all the way down to 15 centimeters, with lower results within that 4-year time period once we got deeper than the 15 centimeters. So you can see that the cover crop integration produced very significant results during this time period in helping to build soil microbial biomass carbon. Again, looking at the average, the soil microbial biomass carbon profile average over the entire period of the study, we find that again the winter cover crop grazing as well as the corn residue grazing through the winter time produced much better microbial biomass carbon in the soil compared to the continuous corn and the permanent perennial pasture that served as the 2 controls. And then if we look at the yields, we find that corn crop yields following the winter cover crop grazing by the cattle were higher in all 3 years, 04, 05, 06, where corn yield was collected for this study, compared to the ungrazed continuous corn controls. So what we find in this particular study, and it follows suit with the other studies that we've presented so far, is that not only do we get significant improvement in soil functions, water infiltration, soil carbon, but we also get improvement in the actual yields of the crops, the cash crops that we're raising in those same fields. So in summary, for the University of Illinois Dudley Smith Farm study, they found that corn yields were higher in the integrated system. Total soil carbon concentration increased significantly in the integrated system, but was unchanged in the continuous corn, and soil microbial biomass carbon was also higher in the integrated system. So now we're going to take a look at a case study. This is Gabe Brown's farm located near Bismarck, North Dakota. And Gabe and I just spoke together at a soil health and cover crop conference in Arkansas a couple of weeks ago, and he had quite a bit of new and very intriguing data that he was presenting from his farm. So many of you on this webinar today have probably heard Gabe speak at a conference here or there, and so you know his story. But for those that don't, in 1991, he purchased land from his father-in-law that had been heavily tilled and conventionally farmed for decades, and his father-in-law routinely used synthetic fertilizers and herbicides. At the time of purchase, the soil organic matter on the farm averaged between 1.7 and 1.9% with water infiltration rates of only about a ½ inch per hour. Now, in contrast, undisturbed native rangeland in the same area had soil organic matters that were 7% or greater and water infiltration rates that were 6 inches an hour or greater. And all of these were measured by the USDA NRCS there and located out of Mandan, North Dakota. Today, Gabe now has row crop fields that are averaging a soil organic matter between 6.1 and 8%, and his water infiltration rates are exceeding 8 inches an hour. And the new data that he presented, they just did some recent measurements on water infiltration rates and found that they have actually now increased to over 10 inches per hour on much of his farm. And he achieved this with constant reduction through in the 2 decades since, through constant reduction of synthetic fertilizer, pesticide, fungicide, and herbicide applications. And he has reduced his synthetic fertilizers by more than 90% now, and his herbicide use by more than 88%. Gabe likes to use what he calls biological primers, which is simply a diverse cover crop mix. And basically what Gabe likes to do is to simulate the diversity, complexity of plant life that is found on the native prairie lands that are located near his ranch. So again, Gabe's goal is to imitate native rangeland and to have highly diverse cocktail cover crop mixes integrated into his cropland, and then livestock impact using adaptive high stock density grazing layered over top of that. This is one example of a cover crop mix that Gabe will typically use, and you can see it's a mix of peas, oats, triticale, vetch, clover, turnips, radish, and phacelia. So this particular mixture would be great for grazing, but also is highly effective for soil building and for attracting pollinator insects as well as other life. This is another mix that Gabe has typically used, and you can see that this one is rather diverse and complex, and this has been a very effective warm season cocktail for Gabe. This is an example of his cover crop mix. They're pre-mixed prior to going into the hopper and being planted with a no-till drill. So what Gabe likes to do is to use livestock and cocktail cover crops as a tool for land improvement. Now, just to show you some of his data and what he's been able to achieve, these are the cost and returns for his 2012 corn crop. His yield was 159 bushels per acre, and this is all dry land produced, no irrigation. And compared to dry land corn production in his county and the surrounding counties, he is producing an average of 20 bushels per acre more than the average farmer in that area. In 2012, the value per bushel was $6.48. His gross income per acre was $1,030. The total cost per acre were right at $210. And so his cost per bushel to produce that corn ended up being $1.32 with a return per bushel of $5.16. Now, Gabe pointed out at the conference in Arkansas that this 2012 corn crop was produced without any fertilizer or herbicide application whatsoever. Similarly, in a 2012 wheat crop, grown dry land, no irrigation, he produced higher than average county average yields compared to the other farmers in the county, used no fertilizer, no herbicides. The value per bushel at that time was $8.09. He had a gross income per acre of $501 with a cost per bushel to produce of $1.88 and a return per bushel of $6.21.
Alan, we have a quick comment here on those last two slides, and there's belief that 2012 was a drought year in North Dakota when he got those kind of numbers.
That is absolutely correct. And let's see, Kent, it was what, 2013 that the grass-fed exchange was held in Bismarck, North Dakota, and Gabe's farm was one of our farms that we toured for that conference. That was also a drought year, and we saw crops and cover crops that had received less than an inch of rain the entire summer and were performing extremely well. And what Gabe told the crowd at the tour there was that it's not how much rain you receive, it's how much rain you keep and retain in your soil. So very good observation and good point, Kent. Yes, those were drought years, and that's what Gabe was able to do. Now, keep in mind that if his soil water infiltration rates and organic matter were still at that early 1990s level that we showed in his baseline data, he would have probably lost those crops that year or had very, very poor crops at best. Now, in terms of a very good resource for you to use if you're considering cover crop mixes for your farm. I recommend, and this is irrespective of who you buy your seed from. You know, there's many local suppliers that you can actually buy your seed from, but this is a very powerful tool to allow you to be able to run a lot of scenarios and play with various mixes and determine what's going to work best in your area and the approximate cost of that mix on a per acre basis. But you can go to greencoverseed.com and click on that menu bar at the top of their website called Smart Mix and go to their Smart Mix 4 calculator. And you can enter as a guest, click on guest, and it'll ask you to enter your zip code. And once you enter your zip code, then they automatically have all of your climate data, including rainfall and so forth data, that'll pop up on that website, and they will produce drop-down menus listing grasses, legumes, brassicas, and broadleaf options that work best in your particular zip code. You will need to enter in not only the zip code, but your seeding method and seeding date, your desired termination date, and then your 3 primary goals. And it has drop-down menus that allow you to be able to select from a variety of goal options, which can range anywhere from you want grazing, you want soil building characteristics, you want nitrogen fixation, water retention, nutrient cycling, so on and so forth. So all of those are listed under the goals. And one of the great things about this website is that it has gauges that as you add different cover crop seed options, that gauge will automatically adjust dependent upon what that gauge is representing. So you'll have a gauge representing nutrient cycling, a gauge representing water retention, a gauge representing grazing opportunity, and so forth. And so it allows you to very quickly see, as you play around with your different seed options, which one is affecting all of those different parameters that you may be looking at. It will also automatically calculate for you a seed cost per acre. You can put in the the seeding rate for each particular cultivar that you're interested in, and it will also give you an effective growing period for your particular area. So this is a really, really good tool. I use it quite often, and again, you can go to any supplier that you want to actually get the seed, but in terms of an effective tool to use, this is the best tool I've found out there yet today. So bottom line is, it all starts with the soil. And this is what we should be seeing in healthy soil. We should see as much or more life beneath the soil surface as what we see above the soil surface. And I was talking with some clients this morning on a conference call. They're actually Maple Hill Creamery, and they're a consortium of grass-fed dairy producers in upstate New York. And we were talking about indicator species above ground. What are some of the things that you can look for above the ground that indicate that you're developing a diverse and complex ecosystem and biology? And one of those are prey species of insects, such as spiders. So if you're starting to see more and more spiders in your fields and in your pastures, then that's an indicator that you're building in more biodiversity. You're not going to see prey if you don't have the predators. Or excuse me, I said that backwards. You're not going to see the predator insects if the prey insects are not there. So whenever you start to see these indicator predator species like the spiders, then that indicates that you're starting to build some desirable biodiversity in your soil. Now we have to remember that 90% of soil function is mediated by microbes, but these microbes are dependent on plants. So how we manage those plants is critical to the success of what the microbes can do for us in the soil. So plant growth and health is highly correlated with how much life and what kind of life we can build into the soil. So bottom line is microbes do matter, and the microbial community structure is absolutely critical. Highly important are the fungi to bacteria ratio that we see in our soils and that predator to prey ratio that I mentioned earlier. And in our soils, the prey are things like soil bacteria, and the predators are microbial species such as protozoa and favorable nematodes that keep the soil bacteria in check and also consume the soil bacteria to effect release of the nutrients that the bacteria have consumed as they pass through the soil due to rainfall pushing those nutrients through the root zone. So the bacteria consume those nutrients and lock them into the root zone, but they can't release them, okay? They have to be consumed by predator microbes such as protozoa to effect release of those nutrients for plant uptake. So an acre of healthy soil should look like this. And if we look over in that far right-hand column, the column in red, then you will see in pounds per acre the amount of microbial species and other organisms that should exist in an acre of healthy soil. And these will exist in that top 6 to 8 inches of soil. So per every acre of soil, we should have over a ton of bacteria, over a ton of fungi, over 90 pounds of algae and protozoa, over 40 pounds of nematodes, over 400 pounds of earthworms, and over 800 pounds of insects and other arthropods. And if we have this kind of activity, this kind of life in our soil, you will see profound impact on total soil functioning and productivity and crop health and yields. Now, this is what vibrant, healthy soil should look like. And again, this is out at Gabe Brown's. This was last year in the middle of August. It was 95, 96 degrees that day. This was in the afternoon. So we'd had, all the way to the mid-afternoon of heating during that day. And we took a spade and just started going out into the middle of these fields and just digging up spadefuls of dirt. And again, no shade anywhere around, 95, 96 degrees in August, and every spadeful of dirt uncovered earthworms. So we had earthworm activity in every single spadeful, and we didn't go any deeper than 8 inches, okay? That is healthy and vibrant soil. We then went to a neighbor's farm next door to Gabe's, and I'll have to admit that we actually slipped on to this neighbor's farm, and Gabe was making sure that the neighbor wasn't there and didn't see us, but so we slipped onto this farm and we did the same thing. We found no evidence of any kind of life whatsoever. There were no soil level insects, no grasshoppers, no spiders, no beetles, no anything present, and no earthworms present, or even evidence of earthworm activities such as castings and so forth. And on top of that, the soil texture was very poor, and the soil had a unpleasant almost acidic and sour aroma, indicating that it was highly bacteriocentric and severely deficient in soil fungi and soil predators such as protozoa. Now this is on a farm located in southern Illinois near El Dorado, Illinois, and this particular farm has been a conventional corn soybean rotation farm with wheat grown intermittently for the last several decades. They have not had any livestock impact until we started this particular trial, and had been just cropping only. So what we did was we went into both the corn soybean rotations and into the wheat rotations and planted cool season annuals into the corn and bean rotations and warm seasons into the wheat rotation, and then incorporated livestock into that system for grazing those cover crops. The cover crop planted was a mix of rye, oats, barley, red clover, lentils, rape, and collards for the cool season. So these results that I'm presenting today are the corn soybean rotation results. We collected baseline data in 2013 at the start of the season, pre-planting, and the soil pH at that time was 6.5, soil organic matter 2.4%, with a CEC of 10.3, and availability in pounds per acre of P, K, calcium, and mag were 145, 252, 3267, and 178 respectively. This fall, after harvest, at the end of the 2015 season and at the end of the corn harvest, we went back in and collected soil samples and analyzed those. The soil pH had increased to 7.3, soil organic matter to 3.5% from 2.4% in 2013. The CEC had increased from 10.3 to 15.8, and then availability of P, K, Cal, and Mag had increased to 190, 568, 5346, and 405 pounds per acre, respectively. When I was up there collecting some data in August, and again, it was pretty darn hot, and dry at that particular point in time, and I went into the cornfields, and we just went at random locations and went all the way to the middle of the fields and worked out. Everywhere that we went, and this particular field was more than 1,000 acres of corn. Everywhere that we went, we found earthworm castings. So the arrows in the top left picture, you can see the brace roots of the corn plant there. All of those are pointing to earthworm castings. We took our spade and dug up, and you can see arrows pointing to earthworms and earthworm tunnels going all through the soil. So they had incredibly increased earthworm activity. And again, here we went across to a neighbor's farm that is directly adjacent and another cornfield, this time with that neighbor's permission, and did the same thing, and we found no earthworm castings and no evidence of earthworms anywhere in that cornfield. So, again, you can see that by integrating cover crops and livestock impact, he was able to make very significant progress in a short period of time, and we were seeing the organism evidence through the earthworm activity and castings. So what is the value of soil organic matter? First of all, it helps us to control rainfall runoff. Typically, 2% organic matter soil will hold about 32,000 gallons of water, or 21% of a moderate to heavy rainfall, meaning that almost 80% of a moderate to heavy rainfall does not stay on that farm, does not stay on that acre. It runs off. So you're losing, effectively, if you had an inch of rain, you're losing 8/10 of that inch. You did not get an inch of rain on your farm. You got 2/10 of an inch of rain. At 5% organic matter, now your soils can hold 53% of a moderate to heavy rainfall. So now you're keeping 5/10 or a little greater of every inch of rain that you receive on your farm. At 8% organic matter, your soils can now hold 85% of a rainfall. So now you're keeping the majority of that 1 inch. And again, I go back to what Gabe Brown said, it's not how much you get, it's how much you keep that matters. And another thing that I always like to say is remember this, that if you build your water, your soil organic matter, that carbon fraction, and increase your water infiltration rates in your soil, you not only get to keep more of the rainfall that falls directly on your farm, you get to keep more of your neighbor's rainfall that runs off of their farm and then onto your farm. So you get a double benefit there. Many of you have seen the rainfall simulators, so I won't spend much time at all on this, but I just want to point out that from left to right, in panels 1, 3, and 4, where we have little to no ground cover, and then it was subjected to a simulated 1-inch rainfall, you'll see that our runoff jars overflowed. So we lost the vast majority of that 1 inch of rainfall, but we not only lost the rainfall itself, the water, you can see the color of the runoff. We lost a lot of topsoil as well. However, in panels 2 and 5, where we had adequate soil cover, you can see that we had very little runoff, and it is quite clear. As a matter of fact, in panel 5, that's been filtered so well we could drink that. Now, I grew up on my family's farm in South Carolina, and they've been there since 1840. And in South Carolina, back in October, Hurricane Joaquin came through and created a lot of havoc. And my family, my cousin snapped this picture immediately following Hurricane Joaquin. The picture on the left is one of my family's fields, and the picture on the right is one of our neighbors' fields. And you can see the difference made by maintaining ground cover. Where they did not maintain any ground cover, 10 inches of rain coming hard and fast can remove a heck of a lot of your topsoil and carry it downstream. So again, we like to use adaptive grazing techniques to build soil organic matter, and we like to use relatively high stock densities to do this. Now, we have, through the Pasture Project, we have presented adaptive high stock grazing webinars, and those are available on the website for you to access. And you are also welcome to contact me or Kent if you have further questions about adaptive high stock density grazing. But we have found this using the higher stock densities with very frequent movements, using single-strand polywire and a lot of the more modern fencing technology, to be highly effective at being able to rapidly build soil organic matter, increase water infiltration rates, and actually decompact the soil rather than compact it. One of the, in the conference in Arkansas a couple of weeks ago, there were several hundred farmers there, and one of the questions that was asked was, well, I thought that cattle compacted soil. The short answer is yes, grazed inappropriately, and no, grazed using adaptive high stock density grazing. So in implementing adaptive high stock density grazing in cover crops, it's actually pretty simple. You can, rather than as a farmer, your concern is you don't want a lot of permanent cross fencing breaking up your fields. Most of you today have gone to much larger equipment. I know that many of the farmers that I work with today, have cultivators and planters and so forth that can cover up to 30 rows or even more at a time. So with everybody going to larger equipment, you don't want a lot of cross fencing breaking up your fields. And so today we have really, really good fencing technology that we didn't have 20, 30, 40 years ago, that allows us to be able to come in and utilize temporary fencing that is highly effective to be able to control the cattle and to move them quite easily through the cover crops during that grazing period. And this is just an example of how that's done. You can see electrified polywire on geared reels, and we can build multiple paddocks at a time and then very easily move the cattle from paddock to paddock. The other thing is these cattle are exceptionally easy to train, and they move themselves. It's not hard at all to move these cattle. If you're moving them from one paddock to the next and they've got fresh forage ahead of them, they're going to move themselves to that fresh forage. You don't have to worry about trying to get behind them and push them in or cowboy them or anything like that. This is grazing summer annuals in between cash crops at Gabe Brown's farm. You can see the cattle having just been turned in to a summer annual cover crop mix. And then this is what it looks like in high stock density. And you can see the polywire in the background there over the backs of those cattle. And you can see the degree of trample and so forth that's going to become new organic matter, not counting the application of manure and urine. Again, this is at Gabe's, and this is winter grazing. So he's grazing a standing winter cover crop, and you can see that it's mostly been frozen out at this period in time, but it still has significant nutritive value to be able to graze. And you can see the density of cattle that he has on this particular field during those winter months. And that tree circled in the background is there for reference. This is the next year's corn crop following that winter cover crop grazing. This corn crop had zero fertilizer applied other than what those cattle applied during the winter, and no herbicide usage. This is a picture of that winter stockpile that you saw in the distance a couple of slides ago, and this is what the cattle were grazing. Now, Kent just provided last week some very interesting data, and we have similar data, Kent, that you've seen from Gabe Brown and other places as well. But this was data in northern Minnesota collected on both stockpile grass and an 8-seed blend cover crop. And this was after, and Kent, you can correct me if I'm misstating here, but after at least 2 or 3 freezes, they went in and they measured the nutrient value of these, both the stockpile grass and the cover crops, and you can see that compared to the suggested TDN, NDF, net energy, and relative forage quality, that the stockpile grass and the cover crops that had been frozen at least twice and heavily frosted more than that fared out extremely well. And that's what we're finding, that even though these cover crops may look by appearance to be dead, dry, with very little nutritive value, many of those managed properly are actually quite high in nutritive value and will support cattle extremely well, even in deep snows. This is an example of a warm season cocktail mix, and this is a cool season cocktail mix. Again, both of these are highly diverse and highly complex. These are just some the resources and tools that you need to do this for the livestock grazing. Again, if you're a farmer on this webinar that hasn't had livestock in maybe 20, 30, 40 or more years, then we have some tools today that allow us to be able to operate much differently than you did back when you may have had livestock on your farm or remember livestock on your farm. Again, as illustrated earlier, we can use a lot of temporary polywire fencing with pigtail or ring top tread-in posts that allow us to be able to very quickly install and take back up our fencing. And this is very portable. We can carry it anywhere. An ATV or a UTV such as a Gator or Ranger or Mule, something like that, rigged up to do this fencing, works extremely well. Portable watering systems can be implemented. We use a lot of solar panel energizers to keep our fencing hot, and the technology here in those solar panel energizers is significantly better than it used to be, and these energizers are actually very, very good today, as good as any plug-in energizer out there. So they're quite effective. At the edges of your fields, we could also consider putting in, some permanent water, such as you see this tire waterer there at the bottom right-hand corner of this slide. Another effective tool to use for the wintertime or cover crop grazing, whether it is a winter or summer cover crop, to allow the cattle to move themselves is called a bat latch. And this bat latch is just simply a programmable device that has a control bolt there on that right-hand side. You attach an electrified bungee gate to that bolt. You set your timer, and that bat latch will release that gate whenever you so desire, and the cattle will move themselves into the next paddock and start grazing without you having to be there all day long to move cattle. So what is the value of the manure application to your fields through multi-paddock grazing and frequent moves by grazing? Well, you can see here that the more frequently you rotate pastures with your cattle, the more even the manure and urine application is going to be. In the top picture, cattle were rotated very infrequently, and the darker spots represent the higher concentrations of manure and urine. And in this particular example, the manure and urine applications from the cattle were concentrated by the water source and the shade source, and much more lightly distributed across the fields themselves. However, when we have more frequent rotations, you can see that we get much more adequate coverage across the entire field. So what is the value of that manure as a fertilizer? Well, let's talk about what's in it. Okay, in terms of NP and K per cow per year, it amounts to each cow produces 85 units of nitrogen, 57 P, and 190 K in a year's time in her manure. Or on a per day basis, 0.3 N, 0.15 P, and 0.52 K. So 100 cows times 100 cows times 11 days per acre will give you the equivalent of 256 units of N, 156 P, 572 K per acre. And I've included this formula here that allows you to very quickly, if you're going to integrate livestock and cover crops into your row crop rotation, this formula allows you to quickly calculate nutrient needs and how many head and how many days of grazing during that grazing period to be able to accumulate the amount of NP and K that you will need for that subsequent crop on every acre. However, we have to look at our various considerations. So the first thing that we want to do is you can look at the option, and this is what we're doing in a multi-year project that we just initiated this past year through the Pasture Project, the Sustainable Farming Association, Practical Farmers of Iowa, and other partners that are involved with this project, with the Pasture Project. But we're working with a number of farmers located in states scattered throughout the upper Midwest, and we are looking at the incorporation of winter cover crop mixes and livestock grazing impact on routine corn, soybean crop rotations. So that's certainly one of your options as a farmer. You can look at the grazing of winter cover crops with livestock integrated in with your standard corn, soybean rotation. We have many farmers who are flying on the winter cover crop mix prior to harvest of either the corn or the bean crop, so that they can start getting establishment of that winter cover crop prior to combining that field. Another option that you have, and we have many farmers who are doing this, is cover crop grazing following a small grain rotation. In many areas of the southern U.S., winter wheat is grown and typically harvested in May or at the latest early June, and many of those farmers have normally gone back in with a earlier maturity group soybean and planting that following the harvest of the small grain crop. However, what we have looked at doing is, instead of planting that soybean crop, going in and planting a diverse cocktail cover crop mix and integrating livestock into that rotation. And what we're finding is that the results and the return per acre are significantly better than double cropping small grains and soybeans. And that also allows those same fields to be prepared for a subsequent corn crop. Another option is perennial pasture and small grain rotation. So you can go into perennial pasture and no-till drill into the sod in the fall of the year, your small grain cash crop, let that grow and harvest that the following year, and then after that is harvested, the warm season perennial pasture rebounds, comes back up, and is available for grazing again. So we have used this quite frequently, and this is working out very well with a number of farmers as well. Then you also have, and Gabe Brown and many others are starting to employ this now, because they have found that longer-term impacts by livestock are extremely valuable for subsequent row crop production and yields and reduction of input cost. What they're finding is that they are going to what I term a full livestock row crop rotation, where they are planting fields and grazing cattle for a full year or even 2 years before they rotate it back into a cash crop rotation. And so they're basically dividing their farms into thirds or even fourths, and they are planting various cash crop rotations, with a third to a fourth of the farm every year being dedicated solely to pasture and grazing livestock, and then again rotating that back in to cash crops. However, some of the things that you do have to consider are, you have to be concerned about herbicide residual. Certainly pay attention to whatever herbicides you're using. You want to pay attention to herbicide label restrictions, particularly as they are related to the ability of livestock to graze those particular fields. You also have to keep in mind that certain herbicides may impact establishment of subsequent cover crops that you may want to plant, so you have to keep that in mind. And you have to be aware of the livestock grazing impact. Again, with these herbicide label restrictions, some of them have long withdrawal periods before livestock are allowed to graze a subsequent crop. You also have to be aware of how cover crops can impact your federal crop insurance program. So please be aware of this. Now, Gabe Brown and a number of others now have made the conscious choice, because the results that they're getting from their cover crop, livestock, row crop rotations are so good, they feel like that in and of itself is their risk management program, and they are now opting out of the federal crop insurance program and no longer participate. So that's certainly something that in the future you may want to consider. But in the meantime, if you're relying on your crop insurance program, you definitely need to check with your agent to determine how specific cover crops, termination dates, and so forth are going to impact your crop insurance. Also be aware, yes.
Yeah, we have a question.
Yes.
I'll tell you what, I'll let you finish this slide and then we'll go to your question here because it's a little bit a step back. So go ahead and finish and we'll get to the question.
You bet. Okay. So another thing that you have to be aware of is USDA NRCS EQIP and CSP programs also may have certain restrictions here in participating in those programs and subsequent livestock grazing. So both in your crop insurance and EQIP and CSP programs, if you're going to participate in either of those, please be sure and check with your either your NRCS agent or your crop insurance provider to make sure what you can and can't do. Okay, Kent, what was the question, sir?
Yeah, here's what we have. How do the economics and soil building capacities of well-managed perennial pastures compare to grazing full-season cover crop cocktails?
Okay, now ask that again. I think I understand what you asked, but repeat it one more time.
Yeah, it's a big one. How do the economics and soil building capacities of well-managed perennial pastures compare to grazing full-season cover crop cocktails?
Okay. Now that question, I'm going to have to answer it like this because it's one of those questions that starts with, where the answers start with, it depends. And we've all heard that, but it really does. So here's the deal. Almost everybody that's farmed, that's produced cash crops, for the farmers on the webinar, you know that when you take perennial pasture, land that's been in pasture for decades or at least several years, and you put it into a cash crop, you experience a pretty significant bump in both the performance of that cash crop, yields, and in reduced input cost. You know that it doesn't take as much fertilizer inputs and all of that. So we know that. We know that if we take pasture that's been in permanent pasture for a while and put it back into cash crops, that for the first year or two, it's going to perform very well, but then after that, it's going to start going downhill, and it's going to require higher external inputs to have the same level of performance. So what we have found is that the best program in terms of overall impact, and that's from both a soil building perspective, including everything, building those organic carbon fractions, water infiltration rates, water retention, CECs, you name it, from building total soil health to actual net return per acre. that the best system with the case studies that we have done so far is for those that are doing like Gabe is now and are opting to do a full, true livestock cash crop rotation. And that's given us our biggest benefits, okay? However, if you're electing, if you want to continue to do cash crops every year in a normal cash crop rotation, the benefit of the cover crop coupled with livestock grazing is absolutely something that you need to consider, because the ability to still build soil, albeit not at the rate that you would build with the full permanent pasture rotation, you still are able to start building your soil health and significantly reduce those input costs. So both work. One just works at a little higher level than the other. So in summary, you need to determine your goals and orient your cover crop livestock programs according to the goals that best fit your farm goals and management skills. You also need to realize potential restrictions and complications and take those into account. And as I said earlier, consult with your NRCS agent, with your crop insurance agent, and so forth. And we have also found through both the research and actual application and real-life case studies that the results from integrating livestock and cover crop rotations into cash crops indicate significant benefits to soil health, crop yields and their health, and input cost reduction. And so this is what it's all about. These are my grandsons. I want them to have the same opportunity that I've had in agriculture if they so desire. This is my goal for the future generations coming on, is that we leave behind something that allows them to be profitable, sustainable, and have a very enjoyable lifestyle. So I thank you very much, and I'll entertain any additional questions or comments.
Well, great. Thank you, Alan. We do have a couple more questions here. And if anybody does have more, please type them in so we can try and get them before the end of the session here at 2:30. The first question is, do we really need complex cover crop mixes like Gabe uses to achieve soil health?
I'll answer that question by saying this. It's a matter of degree, okay, and rapidity. No doubt that the complex cover crop mixes produce quicker results. Okay? All of our data corroborates that. We do get faster results when we can use complex cover crop mixes versus more simple mixes. However, that being said, you will still make progress if you plant a much simpler mix, say like a rye clover mix, coupled with the livestock impact, the grazing impact. Okay, so I would encourage, if you've never done this before and you're a little concerned about a complex mix, then plant a simple mix and graze it. Okay, give it a try. You will get positive results, and eventually you'll want to experiment more and add more diversity and complexity to that cocktail mix. Another benefit, though, that we see beyond the quicker soil building impact of the more complex mixes is that, and again, and these are in head-to-head studies where we've done side-by-side plots, the more diversity that you have in that mix, it produces a symbiotic relationship that allows for greater forage biomass or forage dry matter production. In other words, the more complex mixes in every trial we've done have out-yielded the simpler mixes and the monocultures, and sometimes by as much as 3 to 4 times additional forage dry matter production. So you got to take that into account as well, because then you can graze more cattle, put on more pounds of gain, and generate more net revenue per acre through the impact of the cattle alone. Now, I will say one thing here before we go to the next question, and that's that one of the things that we're doing through the pasture project is we fully recognize that a lot of farmers don't want to have to deal with livestock anymore on their own. They don't want to be encumbered by livestock. They want to be free to do what they want to do in the winter, and so what we're doing is we're matching up grazers with farmers, and that is becoming something that is highly appealing throughout the U.S. And so we're not able to accomplish that in the upper Midwest, but in many other regions of the U.S. as well. So I have a friend in Georgia that works with the cotton rotation farmers, and he's now running 20,000 stocker calves a year, doesn't own any of those acres, but he goes in and plants winter cover crops prior to harvest of the cotton or the peanuts, and once those crops are harvested, he goes in with his temporary fencing and grazes that all winter long, and then comes out prior to planting. And he has farmers calling him, requesting him to graze their land in the winter because it's working so well for them. So remember, you don't have to do the actual grazing. We can help you locate grazers who would be interested in utilizing your land during that time period and giving both you and them dual benefit.
Well, Alan, you're good. You already anticipated the next question, so we'll skip that one and go to the next.
Okay.
Good job. Okay, after that we have, should conventional tillage always be avoided when introducing livestock to cover crops? In other words, will this deteriorate the structure of the soil? Will the tillage deteriorate the structure of the soil?
What we have found, again, is that most are using no-till applications, but we do have some that are using conventional tillage. And certainly, once you get establishment of that cover crop, now the one thing that you have to understand using conventional tillage is that you need to let that cover crop get firmly established and have a solid root system and establish a solid base for the cattle to walk on. When you no-till, you've already got that base, okay? But when you conventional till, it's going to take a little longer before you can get on that cover crop to graze it, because you got to let it get up a little more mature, a little greater and more extensive root system and all of that, so that it can hold those cattle up very well.
Very good. Our next question is, do you have special recommendations or considerations for organic producers?
Yes, with organic producers, first of all, you've got to be concerned about termination, because you're not going to have the option of being able to use an herbicide to go in there to terminate that cover crop prior to planting the next crop. So you have to consider either true livestock row crop rotations, and I'm going to give you my opinion, okay? And recognize this is my opinion, but this is based on very solid evidence and what we're seeing with a lot of participating farmers, that true livestock cash crop rotation is working very, very well for organic farmers, and I would highly recommend it. Now, that being said, if you want to go without that and you want to have a cash crop every year on every acre, but yet integrate the cover crop and livestock, you have to look at cover crops that are more easily terminated, and typically that's going to mean you're more relegated to a simpler mix, okay? that is either going to have a higher degree of winter kill if it's a winter crop, and then you can graze the stockpile, and then you have the benefit of the winter kill there, or you're going to have to use a cover crop that when you graze it down hard and tight with the cattle just prior to getting ready to prepare your ground to plant that subsequent cash crop, and we've done a good bit of that. There are certain mixes that you can use, and rye and things like that work well with this. If you graze them down hard and tight, just prior to planting that next crop, you can do pretty well with that. So there's a number of options there, but there's also the option of rolling that crop down and no-tilling into that. And there's been a number of people that have done quite a bit of research in that. The Rodale Institute certainly has been a leader in that regard. So you can go to their website and take a look at a lot of their research on rolling down that cover crop in preparation for planting the next cash crop.
Great. Well, thanks, Alan. We are coming up on 2:30 here, and I think we're going to have to wrap up. I'd like to again thank Alan for his presentation today. Thank everyone for joining us. Would like to remind everyone interested in learning more about soil health that Dr. Williams will be at the Midwest Soil Health Summit February 17th and 18th, 2016 at Arrowwood Resort near Alexandria, Minnesota. I encourage you to go to the SFA website there on the screen to learn more. And also, we'll be touring some of the sites that Alan mentioned in his presentation today here next week. Next Thursday on November 12th, we'll be touring a site near Redwood Falls, and then on Friday, November 13th, near Blue Earth. So check out the SFA website on that. There will be a recording of this webinar available on the SFA website. Give us a few days to get that downloaded and placed on there, but that's where you'll find this also. And then I'd again like to encourage you to help us determine if this webinar was useful to you, and to help us plan further educational events. You'll be receiving a short survey here in your email inbox, and if you could just take a few moments and fill that out, we'd greatly appreciate it. Thanks again for attending this webinar today. Thank you, Alan, for your very informative presentation as always, and we want to thank Robert McGill at Winrock for providing the tech support to put this webinar together today. Have a great day, everyone.